Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Artefacture YouTube channel and podcast. Here we talk about 3D printing and its new influence on art, architecture, and design. I am your host, Andrew Oshika, and I'm very, very excited to introduce to you AlexisWalsh and Justin Hattendorf of Jaw Studio. Jaw Studio is a New York-based fashion and jewelry brand that leverages 3D printing in their amazing work. Hello, Justin and Alexis. How are you?
Hi, we're great. Thank you so much for having us on today. We're really excited to talk to you.
Awesome. I'm super stoked to have you guys join me for today's session. So before we kind of get into the questions and the conversation, I'd love if both of you guys could just quickly introduce yourselves.
Sure. Yep. So my name is Alexis Walsh, and I'm a fashion designer and artist. I've been working with 3D printing for my fashion work since 2012. So I've been doing it for quite a while. And Justin and I have been working together collaboratively since 2017, making our fashion and jewelry work.
Awesome.
And hey, my name is Justin. My background's in architecture. I've done quite a bit of architecture, industrial design, and now a bit of software as well. We've been doing Jaw Studio for quite a few years, putting all that to work.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so obviously we're here today to talk about, you guys as creatives, as designers, but then also 3D printing and that kind of intersection, that nexus point, right? So that's kind of, again, why we're here. And so I do have a bunch of questions to get into. And so the first one is, what initially interested you in 3D printing, and what was the very first thing that you printed? Cool. Justin or Alexis, whoever wants to go first.
Cool. I can go first.
Yeah.
So I first tried out 3D printing in 2011 at Pratt. When I was studying architecture, and I was using it to create architectural models. And to be honest, I was a skeptic for a really long time. I always liked making. I was really into model making, really to test out different ideas and woodworking. I was doing a little bit of like fabrication with CNC and laser cutting and thermoforming, things like that. And it took me a really long time to understand like the constraints of a 3D printer to really make what I wanted to make. It was hard for me to like translate the ideas I had about what I was making into 3D things. Okay. But about 10-ish years later, I use it all the time. It's like my primary tool. What really I had to learn along the way was it's another tool in the toolbox. So you have to design with it, design for it. And not all projects are great for it. But the projects that we do together are kind of small scale. We're testing out different forms that are like relatively small, like products, wearable products. It's been really amazing because it's kind of like decentralized our work. We don't have to like send off something to fabrication at like a factory or test out a prototype in that kind of way. We have it right at our fingertips. So it gives us really quite a lot of like creativity, like autonomy in the process and creativity along the way.
And we're able to be really agile and design on our feet, which is great.
And that's exactly right. I mean, just the immediacy of it, right? I mean, you come up with an idea, and instead of struggling with like, is this going to work, or maybe I should pivot and do something else, you could say, all right, let's quickly just print it out and get a feel for it.
Yep,
totally.
And,
prototype in an hour.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was that?
You can have a prototype in an hour.
Yeah, exactly. I was just kind of thinking back to, in the days of old when I was at RISD in grad school and, working on things and trying to, validate concepts, you would spend forever sketching. And then once you kind of felt like you had something that was viable or interesting to pursue, then you would shift over, you'd go from 2D to 3D. And that meant like clay modeling or wrench shape or Strux foam, right? And you create these orthographic drawings, and then you'd glue, the front or the top or whatever it was, and then slowly, arduously, you would carve out, you would free that 3D form, and then after all that work, you're like, screw it, it's not what I want to do, and then you go back. 3D printing is amazing because like it's instant, and so it hyper accelerates, I think, that part of the design process, that exploratory process.
Oh, so, yeah. Learn by making instead of learning by waiting and finding out.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Alexis, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I would say what initially got me interested in 3D printing was in my studies at Parsons. So I went to Parsons and I studied a combination of both fashion design and industrial product design. And my background is really in more of like fine art and sculpture, which I would then put into my fashion work. So when I was introduced to the idea of rapid prototyping through 3D printing and 3D modeling, it became such an innate need that I just wanted to learn how to do this, and I really wanted to incorporate it into my practice. So in 2013, my first ever 3D printed fashion piece was a piece called Spire Dress that was fully 3D printed. It was a collaboration with my good friend Ross Leonardi, and that piece actually went viral. So that was a
Wow,
very fun surprise.
that's awesome. Now, in that program that you were in, was was 3D printing as a methodology to manifest? Was that like part and parcel, or was it like, hey, here's this new magic box that does stuff? You could figure it out, or you don't have to. Like, what was what was that dynamic? Because that was a number of years ago, and I'm just still kind of relatively early days, right? So
Yeah,
just
so
curious.
it was definitely pretty early. I want to say in 2011 when I was a student, Parsons had maybe three 3D printers. It was a very tiny lab, and it was really only the industrial design and architecture students that were using it. So in
Okay.
my classes, we were never actually directly taught to use 3D printing. It was more of like a tool that was available if we wanted to go through the processes of learning how to do it. So I taught myself how to do 3D modeling by watching YouTube tutorials. I learned
Awesome.
how to
I
do
love that.
Word, Python, and Rhino through hours and hours of tutorials.
Oh wow. Yeah, like the programming part of it, I haven't really delved into, but like Rhino, yeah, you're right. I taught myself Rhino. Um, yeah, I bought like a really fat like Rhino for jewelry or whatever ages ago, right? And so between that and then a bunch of YouTube videos, yeah, I taught myself. And these days, I mean, you can almost self-teach yourself anything, right? I mean, it's
Right.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
so many resources available. It's amazing.
exactly. It totally is amazing. All right, awesome, awesome. Well,
Oh,
thank you
and
for that.
actually, I just want to add too.
Yeah,
Now at Parsons, they are currently teaching classes to do 3D printing for fashion design, which
they
I think is
are.
amazing and so cool.
Okay. That is super cool. That's awesome. I would assume, well, I mean, I don't have a perspective because, I mean, I was at RISD forever ago and, um, it was unheard of basically, to use a 3D printing methodology in any kind of student work, right?
Yeah.
Um, I actually, I don't even know how I did it or how I discovered it. It might have been through a contact, but I actually leveraged 3D printing back then, and this is going a long, long time back. I don't even want to, say how long ago, but it was ages ago when I was a grad student at RISD. And just a quick aside, because since we're talking about this, I was working on a project for a talking book or like an audio book player, and it was sponsored by the National Library Service. I think that was it. And they had a competition to redesign this audiobook player for um, visually impaired and physically handicapped users, right? You go in a library, you get this audiobook from the shelf, and you use this device to play it. And again, it's for people that are, um, maybe blind, visually impaired, and then also handicapped. So this thing had to be universally designed. It had to be accessible to that population. And
Oh,
just really
cool.
quick, so I came up with the design, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do this I'm not going to do the final form in the conventional
Mhm.
media, right? Like clay or whatever. And I actually got it binder jetted
Oh
by a
yeah.
company called Z Corp. I don't know if that rings a bell to any of you guys.
Yeah, that was my
That
first
sounds
3D the
familiar.
first 3D printer I used in school, Z-Corp.
Right? In Z Corp. And dude, this is like going like early 2000s, right? This is forever ago, right? And I got it printed in full color, right? It was this 3D print
Whoa.
that was in full color, and it was stunning. And I printed two, and it was like mad expensive. I printed two because one I had to send away to submit, as part of the competition, and the other one I kept in my studio and I kept it on my desk, and everybody just they'd walk by and are like, dude, did you make that? Or what is that? Like, it was the conversation piece in the studio. But anyway, but yeah, like it wasn't sanctioned. It was still like a black art, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's 3D printing. So anyway, but cool. That's great to hear. Thank you for those answers. All right, so moving on. What value do you think 3D printing brings to your process and to the final outcomes of your work? I know it's kind of a mouthful, but that's the question.
So I would say right off the bat, I think one of the most interesting values that 3D printing brings is the sustainability aspect. So not only are a lot of the materials both recyclable and biodegradable, but certain 3D printing processes like SLS, selective laser sintering, can be completely zero waste. So that's pretty revolutionary. It's actually amazing.
I agree totally. You're right with the SLS because it's like a powder bed fusion. It's all the unused powder. They just scoop it back up and you could reuse it. It's like a 97% reuse rate or whatever it is. But yeah, you're right. It's an excellent point. That and all the other hosts, the host of other reasons, like for me, just make 3D printing so incredibly, exciting, right? I mean, it's going to revolutionize everything, how designers work and how maybe even we consume, right? I mean, we can maybe print stuff at home, and then if we get bored, maybe there's a way to decompose that thing and then reuse. I don't know. It's like getting kind of out there, but it's really starting to open up a lot of different doors and possibilities, and it's just absolutely amazing and exciting. I don't know, Justin, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. I think like also, I mean, in addition to the sustainability and the materials, I think what's really cool about 3D printing is you're able to create shapes and forms that you're unable to in other ways. So like think about like high texture or like latticing or any sort of like complex shapes. They're like it's much more integrated into like digital modeling, so you're able to experiment much more extreme shapes than you are with say like injection molding or like
more conventional
methods like that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's been really important for our experimentation and the products that we make.
Yeah, and being able to just iterate things quickly and like rapidly prototype ideas. And also piggybacking off of that, I think another really useful value is that you are able to make things made to order so that you don't necessarily need to have like a stock of materials or have any material that's wasted. You can really just print things on demand.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, and then also starts to speak to like, well, you could start manufacturing or producing locally, right? And so then you could start, improving your local economy by hiring again locally. You reduce the waste needed for transportation, right? That's a huge thing. Warehousing, storage, all the energy associated with that, of course, packaging and all that stuff. So again, it's a game changer. It's really, really exciting. And that's why, me personally as a designer, I, kind of intuitively, it resonates with me because it just feels so good and it's like the natural progression of the way things should be. And so that's why I'm kind of invested and really interested in it as a designer. All right, so let's keep moving along here. So what 3D printing methodologies are you guys currently using in your work, like your work or at JAWS Studio?
Yeah, so with JAWS Studio, we primarily use we use a Prusa MK4, primarily just PLA, natural PLA. It's kind of funny because it's like the default material that you get with your Prusa.
But it's so beautiful.
But it's really beautiful. We
beautiful.
We really like that, like the different lighting effects and different like layers of transparency you're able to achieve with that. So, yeah, we've experimented with like textures, infill, density, all of that, just like with this one material that is probably the first material most people try out. And I think I'm still so attached to it. You can take it really, really far. There's still new things to learn about it. So.
Is it semi-transparent or is it pearlescent or is it like because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say it's semi-transparent depending on the amount and the direction of the infill that you use. Yeah. And then the effect is pearlescent, so it's really beautiful in sunlight.
Wow.
It almost it looks like has like a pearly, like bubbly effect. It's really gorgeous.
Okay.
So we use it for a lot of our jewelry pieces.
Yeah, and I could see how it's a natural complement to, the work that you're doing, whether it's fashion or jewelry or anything like that. That sounds awesome.
Mhm.
I have like a weird, I don't know. I mean, with FDM, it's an FDM process, right? You mentioned the cruise. Um, I I had early day experimentation with an ender, whatever it was, and it just wasn't giving me the output, the resolution that I wanted or expected. And so I kind of gave up. And this is like going back a little bit. And I told myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to jump from printer to printer and then expect some, amazing leap of quality or whatever. And so I kind of just let that part of it go, like, you know, experimenting with particularly FDM. And I just kind of switched to getting my prints outsourced and using SLS and multi-jet fusion and all that. And I know it's more of like an industrial process. It's not necessarily something that you're doing at home in your, downstairs or in your garage or whatever, because it's pretty messy and big and
Mhm.
dust and powder. But but now I think I'm ready to revisit, the FDM printers, because obviously they've gotten better and the resolution has gotten amazing.
Yeah.
The overall quality of the printing has gotten better, and so yeah. So anyway, for whatever it's worth, I definitely want to kind of reinvest and relook into FDM printing, and then Bamboo Labs. I don't know if do you guys have experience with Bamboo Labs at all?
No,
Oh,
but
I
I'm
haven't worked with
familiar.
them.
Yeah, I haven't worked with them.
Okay. Yeah, apparently I don't know, maybe 8, 10 months ago they came out with uh with an FDM printer, and
Mhm.
supposedly it's a Prusa killer and the
Oh,
rest of
really?
it.
Ooh, okay, we'll have to check
Yeah,
that
and
out.
and it's got a beautiful enclosure, like really nice industrial design. And anyway, I've been kind of watching from afar a little bit. I'm like, maybe I should finally, bite the bullet and invest in that. But anyway,
When,
I,
when
I
when when I mentioned that it took a long time for me to get into 3D printing, it's FDM was
Yeah,
the thing
those
that made it
early
so
3D
difficult.
printers those
Yeah,
were rough.
yeah.
they were rough.
With
Really rough.
like a rep wrap that we built
Oh
at our
no.
school, and it was like it would work about 30% of the time, and
Right.
if you got it to work, it was great. But yeah, it was very frustrating. But
It
yeah,
was the wild, wild west of printing back then, wasn't
but
it?
Definitely.
it's come a long way. Like
Yeah.
now we kind of know what to expect. Like yeah, you could definitely see the layers more than you can in other types of like 3D printing.
Yeah.
But we use that to our advantage, give it a little more like texture to the shapes that we're
Yeah.
making.
And we do also, for some of our other materials, like
Yeah.
we use quite a bit of 3D printed resin and like 3D printed stainless steel. And for those, we will outsource them. And we use Shapeways.
Yeah.
We love
Yeah.
Shapeways.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be about materials, and we're talking about materials now. But quickly going to Jaw Studio and some of the work that I saw there, there's metal there, right? And so are you guys? So okay. So I think you just answered the question. So
Mm-hmm.
for metal, you're outsourcing that to Shapeways, right?
Yeah.
But like, okay, selective laser melting or whatever
Yeah, I
or
think
whatever.
it's SLM or yeah, I think that's
For the metal process?
right for the steel.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the steel is SLM, and then we do also use them for some of our 3D printed nylon products, which are using the SLS selective laser sintering.
Oh, okay, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. All right. You don't have like what is it, like an electron beam melting device in your closet, right?
Not
To
closet.
use
No, I wish.
I wish that
huge,
was
huge scale, yeah, metallic prints. Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
on the
yeah,
Christmas list.
Our neighbors would appreciate that.
yeah. That's yeah. Maybe next year. Maybe next year.
Yeah.
Um, any other comments on materials? So you talked about, PLA being a favorite, and then there's a recycled version of PLA that you could use? Is that what you
Yeah,
mentioned,
so
or?
some brands allow you to you can either purchase recycled material or you can send them your like old prints or like any excess filament, and then they will then recycle it for you. And the PLA that we use is biodegradable, which is really cool.
Oh, it is biodegradable. Okay, okay. Now, are those specialty brands, or is that something that like Prusa also offers, or is it a little more niche as
So I
far
would
as?
say I think PLA in general is usually biodegradable.
Usually, yeah.
Because I
Oh,
think
it
the
is.
material in itself is made from plant starch and like
Mhm.
plant sugars. Um,
Okay.
but I think the recyclable ones are something that you need to
Mhm.
seek out specifically.
Okay. So, that being said, you're doing fashion, you're doing jewelry. Obviously, these things are applied, they live on the body. Is there any concern about like, I'm going to wear this thing for a while. There might be some weird effect with
Mhm.
prolonged skin contact and use and sweat and all that. Like, has that come up, or is that a concern? Or PLA is pretty safe, it's non-toxic? Like, just curious about that because that's a consideration, right? As a designer
Yeah,
and
of course.
picking materials. So yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And to counteract that, we finish all of our pieces and we seal them in like a protective material so that there is not any direct 3D printed on skin contact. There's like a barrier between your
Yeah.
skin and the 3D printed piece.
Oh, okay.
I am pretty sure that there are some types of PLA that are even food safe.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's toxic, but I would be more concerned about the oils from your skin eventually discoloring the 3D printed material through
Uh,
repeated touching and use.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, we've also like in Apex our first project together.
Mm.
We have the 3D printed part attached to
A base cloth of
like a base
fabric.
cloth, yeah, base cloth denim, and then we actually threaded it with screws. So basically, like the 3D print is never in contact with your skin. We kind of like integrated like metal with the 3D print with the fabric, so that it's all kind of like one continuous piece. So we were kind of thinking about that the entire time. Like, how do we
Right.
keep it
Something that you're
integrated?
wearing
Mhm.
long term, how do you keep it from eventually degrading over time
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
getting damaged by repeated use?
Mhm.
So we found that using it as like a hardware application
Yeah.
was actually the perfect solution.
Oh, interesting, interesting. Going back to that veneer, that layer that you add
Mhm.
to kind of protect the printed piece from oils and stuff, is that something that you add, or is that added like a post-processing kind of a step, like after you print, or what does that look like? How does that work?
That's something that we do in our little
Yeah.
studio.
Oh, you do that. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. And then
It-
we also, I'm very big on handcraft and hand finishing. So even though something is being 3D printed, we very meticulously sand all of it and make sure that it's completely perfect before it comes in contact with
okay.
anyone.
Okay. You know, Oh, that's awesome. I was just wondering, do you guys have any experience with like ceramics or like 3D printed wood, or there's other kind
Mhm.
of pseudo exotic, not that ceramics is an exotic material, but like, I'm just curious, do you guys have any experience like with those types of materials being in this, being in a 3D printed kind of formulation? Do you guys have any experience with that? Just
Oh
curious.
man, not
I've
yet, but it's something we've been talking about.
Yeah, I've experimented a little bit with the wood. It's like a plastic and wood mixture.
Okay.
So basically, I don't know exactly how it's manufactured. I think it's like sawdust kind of integrated with plastic. So
Yeah.
you can sand it and stain it.
And it behaves
Okay.
like wood. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little plasticky, but it
It's a little plasticky.
yeah, yeah.
Hopefully the plastic is recyclable and
Yeah.
you would think. Yeah.
I'm dying to get into ceramics, and I'm also really interested in 3D printed wax. So that's something we
Yeah.
haven't tried yet, but that's on the list for sure.
3D printed wax?
Hmm.
Wow, okay.
Mhm.
Um and I'm just gonna take a shot like for really cool looking candles, or like what would you use wax? Like investment casting, yeah, you use that to create jewelry, but like are there any other applications or
Yeah, so definitely for some really crazy, amazing candles.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
also to make, yeah, for model making, for maybe some of our other jewelry designs or for
Oh,
festivals.
okay. All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
I mean, we've also talked about casting wax. So the other interesting thing is sometimes you're not always making the final design in 3D printing that. Sometimes you're making like a jig or like a form to cast into. So something like wax is really interesting because
Yeah.
you can make a form and cast into that. And you could make pretty sick candles pretty
Yeah,
easily.
pretty
So.
crazy, intricate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. But in that application, I don't know, is FDM like a good methodology to use for like casting jewelry? Because I know the resolution is, they use SLA for that, right? Like to create super high res surface finished, molds. So then, when you pull that thing out and you've got your ring or whatever, it's completely uniform. But has FDM got to that point where you could actually use it for creating molds for jewelry or not yet? What do you guys think?
I feel like it depends on like a case by case basis. If we were making fine jewelry, I would probably not use FDM. I think I would use something more like SLA. But I think for something like a candle or like wax, I personally think that the like linear kind of stepped texture on an FDM print is kind of beautiful and it's really interesting looking. So
interesting. Okay.
I wouldn't see that as a negative. I think it would just be an interesting feature of the end result.
Yeah, it's one of those things that if you know what you're like the kind of constraints and effects that are going to come out of it, like if you know it's going to be layered, you can work with it and it can become part of your design and part of the effect. But but if you're talking fine jewelry cast in like silver,
maybe not.
I wouldn't recommend it.
You don't. Yeah. Okay. All right. But it sounds like FDM is we'll get there eventually, right? Probably.
I think so. Yeah. We're FDM believers.
You're what? You're what?
FDM believers.
There you go. I think I'm going to be a believer soon too, based on what I've been seeing. Yeah. All right. So the next thing is just kind of a question about tools, right? So 2D, 3D CAD design programs. We did talk a little bit about, you guys using the Prusa FDM. Like, you guys use scanners or, I don't know, anything else, any other peripheral, any kind of peripheral equipment in your work at JAW or anything like that. If you wanted to talk a little bit about that, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Most of our tools are just software tools. We've used Rhino and Grasshopper quite a lot. We've experimented with NTOP. In the past, we've experimented with like Houdini processing, Python, Maya, Cinema 4D. We like
ZBrush.
ZBrush.
Wow. Okay.
So we like to mix and match. Yeah. I think like we're really looking for like each kind of like unique characteristic that each one of those softwares brings to the table and take the best from each piece of software and try to experiment with whatever crazy stuff we can make from that, basically. So the surprise, I think, of connecting those tools is what makes it really interesting for us.
Yeah. Man, 3D software. At this point I'm using Rhino almost exclusively. I did try Fusion 360. It's a solid modeler versus like this NURBS, surface modeling thing, but I don't know. I just kind of latched on to Rhino, and it's just been good to me. And admittedly, the stuff that I'm designing, it's fairly simple. It's not hyper organic or multifaceted or whatever. But I'm starting out, and so for the kind of aesthetic approach that I want in my products, it's fine. Like, I'm not too self-conscious about it. But sorry about that. There's some traffic happening in front there. So you mentioned like Maya and then NTOP. Are those? Is that too almost overkill, or is there value in using like those really? Because I know like NTOP, like I think that's the company that you work at, right? They're like generative design, like more hardcore additive manufacturing, industrial applications, right?
Oh yeah.
I don't know. So but there's value in using like those really powerful tools and more like craft, fashion. I don't know, like
totally, yeah.
Curious.
We use NTOP quite a lot. I think whenever we do, so we have this one repeating form that we use a lot, which is this like mass of like interlocking bubble shapes, and it's such a complicated batch of geometry that really I feel like the only way that it can be made is through a program like NTOP.
I think like we're definitely not like running simulations or doing any hardcore engineering or anything like that. But some of the kind of like complexity that you can get out of those tools is really interesting, and like you could definitely achieve it in Rhino.
But it would probably take much longer.
Take a lot longer.
It would. Okay, even with Rhino, or I'm sorry, with Grasshopper.
Yeah, with Grasshopper. Yeah, with Grasshopper, you definitely can. Like, actually, I think all of our pieces that we've actually physically made have come from Grasshopper Rhino at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of like the experimentation we do in other softwares is more like looking for ideas, looking for how to
Oh, I see.
mix and match different geometries and whatnot. And then like then we kind of like go back to the drawing board and build it out in Rhino Grasshopper. So it's like um, our
Yeah.
own like
specific
specific
process.
tool set. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I also want to say I use Maya less now, but when I was a Parsons student and I was first learning 3D modeling, I actually found Maya incredibly intuitive because the way that the software works, it feels more like physically sculpting an object
That's
and less like math and like function based.
right.
So
Okay.
for me, coming into it from like a fashion designer art background, I found that much easier to initially jump into.
That's probably why you like ZBrush then.
That's probably why I
Yeah.
like ZBrush too.
Yeah.
And Blender the same flavor as far as a tool along those lines, like being more sculptural versus like
Yeah.
analytical or
Blender's come a long way. Yeah, you could do quite
okay.
a lot with Blender that you could do. I mean, not even 5 years ago, you had to use a different tool to achieve it. But like Blender has pretty much all the main things that you'd get from Maya at this point.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I always had this preconceived idea of like Maya, Blender, and whatever else, like being more like character
Oh yeah.
design, like for and for special effects and sci-fi and all that. And so I kind of went. I mean, I don't know if there's a dichotomy that you could draw, but like one's movie production, character design, and the other one's like more engineering, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Pro E, architectural. Cobalt was one, and then Vellum. I don't know. These are like ancient, maybe 2D drafting. But anyway, God, where was I going with this? Pro E. I remember. I think we were at RISD. God, what was it? It was Pro E. I think it was. I think that's what the ID students were using,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like a
Oh, yeah.
hardcore
Yeah.
mechanical engineering. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so on that note, like if somebody, let's say somebody's, discovered 3D printing and they're really into it and they want to get started, and yet buying a 3D printer is easy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to create your own work and really get into that part, like what would you recommend? Like, oh, I need to, I need to learn a software. Is it Maya? Is it Blender? Is it, I know I did SketchUp and then I went to Fusion 360 and then I went to Rhino. So it was kind of like this weird path. But there's a whole host of tools. What would you guys recommend? Like somebody to just kind of get started and be able to get up and running quickly?
For sure.
Ooh. I've
I
heard
think
good things about SketchUp. I personally have not really tried using it. But I feel like I've heard that SketchUp is a good initial first step
Yeah.
into 3D modeling.
I'll always have a soft spot for Rhino, and it's like it's very good, like well priced for students, like really easy to get your hands on Rhino. But I don't know. One thing that Rhino it's a little tough to do in Rhino is make things solid. And when you're working in a 3D printer, getting that watertight geometry is super important.
So that's capable of being
So
printed.
yeah, I've run into some like rough times with Rhino trying to get it to work. But
Oh my
if you know what
God.
you're doing, it's great. It does take a long time to learn. But I think like I was really impressed with Fusion 360 the past few years. Like when you're really getting in, if you're familiar with drafting at all, it's pretty easy to get in and start making 3D shapes. Like I've been pretty impressed with that actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Fusion 360 is a great option. But yeah, Rhino is a pain when it comes to creating like those enclosed, solid poly surfaces, right? Because then if you have like a naked edge or a manifold surface or whatever the hell else could go wrong,
Yeah.
you are in like a Pandora's box of trying to figure out like what surface is being naughty, right? And then you have to, blow it up. And then, oh my God, I'm actually in the middle of that nightmare right now where I'm doing a new thing for, the Artefacture collection. And I've designed a typeface based on Cooper Black. I don't know if you're familiar with that typeface. It's like this really kind of vernacular, super popular typeface that you've seen everywhere. And so I wanted to kind of take it and put my own spin on it and then offer it as a 3D printed collection of letter forms. Like there's the alpha, I got the whole alphabet, and then numbers 0 through 9 and some punctuation. And the idea is that you could print out your kid's name or a cool phrase, love or whatever.
So
That's
cool.
the idea. Yeah. And so I designed the typeface, or I redesigned the typeface in Affinity Designer. I moved away from like Adobe. I don't prescribe to that model anymore. So yeah. And then I imported the SVGs into Rhino, and then I've kind of extruded them into 3D forms. And then you're adding fillets to the edges and all that stuff. But then and then you're shelling, and then but through that process, as you were saying, Justin, like to get that to be an airtight, enclosed polysurface solid, anything could go wrong. And so it's been weeks trying to fix all that stuff. So anyway, that's where it could get kind of naughty and messy with Rhino. So anyway.
Oh, yeah. Many hours. I'm very familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so we could feel each other's pain. So that's cool.
Definitely.
All right. So let's kind of move on here a little bit quickly. So in general, what new 3D printing technologies or materials are you kind of interested or excited about? Something that's maybe coming up down the pike that you're like, that's cool. Maybe we could use that in our work. Anything like that that's kind of piqued your interest? Or
I'm super interested in exploring more flexible 3D printed materials. I think it would be amazing to kind of get into that for working on more directly wearable pieces that would kind of function more like the way that traditional fabric would drape and fall on a body.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably on the horizon for us. Maybe like next new project.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because it seems like the majority of applications of 3D printing when it comes to fashion, it's more of like an accent. It's like a focal point. It's this superficial, not superficial in a negative term, but it's more of a decorative thing
Like
that
an
sits on.
additional piece on top of something. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
It's not like integral to the foundational structure of the garment or whatever. But that would be a cool opportunity to print something that you could just slip over and wear and say it was 3D printed. So like chainmail or something, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
Something
definitely.
like that. A crude example or metaphor, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I know, Justin, do you want to add to that, or do you have anything?
Yeah, I have kind of a different perspective actually.
Okay.
I'm really interested in industrial 3D printing. I know I've talked a lot about FDM and desktop printers, but industrial printing is the scale is increasing pretty dramatically. There are many more factories than there were at local factories, like within tons of major cities, which means like for people working with those manufacturers, it's much more accessible than it ever has been, and there really is like a smaller and smaller gap between kind of hobbyist 3D printers and like professional like industrial parts. So I think it's super cool to me that you can kind of download Blender for free, hook it up to an open source 3D printer, like learn this like way of working and way of thinking, and suddenly it's actually very real at a huge scale where we can make like tons of like actually high complexity, like high performing parts kind of all within the same way of thinking. So basically it jumps from like hobbyist to like professional like very quickly.
Exactly.
So which I think is super cool. Super cool.
I mean, the implications and the repercussions of this tech, I mean, I don't know. I mean, one cannot help but be hopeful as far as like, because we've talked about obviously, well, not we, but like, we've shipped jobs overseas, there's no manufacturing base left in the States and all that good stuff. But it looks like this stuff could like, bring it back, make it more local, and it could be a net positive for all parties, for all stakeholders, right? People could get jobs and people are employed, and they're working in places where we're making things. And then guess what? We're not burning coal, we're just burning electricity to fuel these things or whatever. I mean, you could go on and on and on, but like overall it sounds not utopian, but it sounds positive, right? I mean,
definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so again, I'm hopeful, and again, that's why I'm kind of attached to this technology because I think there's a lot of positivity and a lot of great benefits. So okay, so let's keep moving in the interest of time. Let's see. Okay, are there any artists or designers that are using 3D printing that you admire?
You first. Yeah.
My absolute favorite designer of all time is Iris Van Herpen. I think she's a genius. The way that she incorporates these complex, beautiful, 3D printed and like digitally rendered designs onto haute couture fashion is just unbelievable.
Okay, okay. Um, can she be considered a pioneer of leveraging or using 3D printing in her work, or like I'm just curious, did it all kind of did it was it a phenomenon that just happened at once, or was there one pioneer within the fashion realm that like really latched onto it and like started using it? Can she be described as that person, or no, or tell us about that? Like, how did that all kind of emerge?
So I think I would say definitely. I think she can be singularly credited for bringing 3D printing into the real fashion industry and like actual high fashion. Um, I believe she was an architecture student, and I think like fresh out of school, she had done all of these incredible collaborations with these um, high fashion designers, and I think she's really given a lot of validity to the idea of using 3D printing um,
Okay,
in a high level fashion realm.
okay,
And I would say she
awesome.
was also one of the early adopters of the technology, at least in fashion for something wearable.
Okay, cool, cool. Justin, do you have anybody that kind of sticks to mind or comes to mind as for
Yeah.
artist or fashion designer
For
or?
sure. Yeah. I really like, there are a couple artists that I really like who use 3D printing for most of their work. I like Wang and Soderstrom is one of them, and Audrey Large. They do actually pretty similar type of work, more like sculpture. Um, and I think the reason that I'm so interested in them is kind of what I was mentioning earlier about like mixing and matching software. They're like really taking kind of like animation software and stretching it to be like kind of to its limits, and then bringing that back into a 3D printed part. So I think it's really interesting that they're able to blur the boundary between kind of physical and digital, and like is it virtual or is it real? Like it really kind of blends those environments together. So like what you're seeing on your computer is really not so different than what you might be seeing in.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. And
yeah,
are you guys? I mean, are you using their work and their methodology as probably as a source of inspiration, right? I mean, you see that and you're like, oh, okay, that triggers something, and then that puts you on a path, right? Of course, right? That's probably how it works. Yeah.
oh yeah, totally.
Um, yeah, that's awesome. One thing that I wanted to just quickly comment on was I don't know. I mean, a designer that I'm a fan of that I believe is starting to use 3D printing is Russ Lovegrove.
Oh yeah.
Is that
Hmm.
right? He's a British industrial designer, um, famous, and I think he's more known for his like interior design and furniture. But what's interesting is he's always had this very like organic, morphic kind of aesthetic, and I could always see that he was always fighting conventional means of manufacturing to enact his vision. And now with 3D printing, it's like custom tailored for his
Right.
aesthetic. And so I think I'm following him on Instagram, and just the stuff he's doing, and he's like ramping it up to like 100x. Like he's just going for it, with that super like again really amorphic and fluid and hyper organic um, kind of aesthetic. So yeah, so I'm definitely noticing that. So it's good to see that these high profile designers are leveraging that. That's awesome. Um, all right, so you know you can't have any kind of discussion these days vis-a-vis art, design, creativity, or whatever it might be without interjecting and bringing up AI, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
of course, my question for you is, and I'm going to just read it here. What are your thoughts about AI? Do you see AI as a positive thing for artists and creative people? What do you guys think?
Oof. Yeah. I'm torn.
We have strong feelings about this.
Yeah. I
Okay, yeah, I'd love to
I
hear
really
it.
want to like AI. I'm like in the tech field. I'm around AI stuff all the time.
Inescapable.
It's inescapable.
Yeah.
It like I like the idea that it could make design more accessible. Like the act of design more accessible. It's easier to make 3D. It's easier to come up, like take an idea in your head and make it a real thing. Um, the hard part for me is like the tools like Midjourney, Dolly, ChatGPT. It's almost too easy to make
Yeah.
to get something out of your idea and onto paper, and it's really hard to evaluate like if that's a good idea, if it's a great idea, if it's a not so good idea. Everything just kind of blends
Yeah.
together, and there's so
Yeah.
much content so fast that it's really
Totally.
difficult to like maybe it's good for a creative process, but it's really hard to like weed out the good ideas from the bad ones, even in your own content that you're making.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Because now you've artificially added this like hyperdrive capability to that idea generation process, or just this notion of, adding, assets or things to evaluate and critique. And before that was limited vis-a-vis what I could do in Photoshop or a CAD program or whatever. But now we've accelerated it. We've, amped it up. And now instead of looking at like 20 versions or whatever it might be after a week, it's 200. And
Oh yeah.
that, like, I understand, like, now it's like, and it's tough for designers that have a perspective and a discerning eye. But then, like, when you're bringing in a client or whatever, somebody that's maybe not trained, then it's like, talk about being overwhelmed and then that complicating the conversation. So, yeah,
Right.
no, I agree, man. It's,
I think like another kind of negative aspect is the ever-present threat of like plagiarizing or like accidentally plagiarizing, because a lot of these AIs are trained on other people's work, kind of just like as the, like the inherent process of the AI learning how to do things. So you could be generating an idea that's actually maybe like a copy of someone else's idea or
yeah,
heavily influenced, and you as the person generating the prompt would have no idea.
Right. IP is a big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if you're typing a prompt, you type it the most amazing original prompt. The moment you hit send, that's not yours anymore.
it's not yours anymore.
Yeah. It's and that's really hard for me.
Yeah. I have a
because
tough time with that as a designer.
yeah.
Yeah, because you're right, because now that kind of, it depersonalizes that whole creative pursuit and the process. And even, well, I mean, there's a component of discovery, right? Because you tweak a variable and you get something else. You're, oh, that's cool, I didn't know that. Um but I don't know, like, I really mixed feelings. I mean, on one hand, I'm really positive and optimistic and, brave new world and all that good stuff. But then on the other side, I could definitely see, and it's happening already. Like, a lot of people, creative people, content creators will get displaced because now we've got these automated tools that are just creating this stuff for us. And so I don't know, it will definitely be interesting. But again, that'll behoove those people to, maybe become experts at generating prompts. I don't know, or just being able, like, maybe they'll evolve into like these AI wranglers or pilots where, like, they have a suite of AI tools and they're just now, before it was a team of 100, now it's just a team of one or two, and they're able to, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to, you know what? I think at the end of the day, it'll be a mixed bag. It usually always is, right? It's never like super positive, and it's never the end of the world. It's always like a mixed bag, and
Yeah.
and I think
It's
that'll
at
be
the end of the day, it's another tool. It's a craft. It will become a craft over time for sure. And same as I don't know, woodworking. Woodworking's still here. We're talking
exactly.
about 3D printing, but like I love carpentry. It's like it's really fun. It's still
I
really
agree.
good use cases for carpentry out there. I kind of the same with AI. Like I do think it's gonna be great for
For
creative,
design iterations
yeah,
and maybe
creative
like
process.
creative
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, getting ideas out there. I still like personally really like to finish things like on my own, and like I'm really into craft, like really finishing the craft of something
Yeah.
like by hand, like on my own. AI is not going to replace that, but it will definitely change how we like come up with ideas, how we experiment, how we share ideas with one another, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it'll prompt people to, spend less time in front of the computer or any kind of machine, and go out and do some woodworking or fishing or whatever. I mean, it
It's
might
true.
motivate us to kind of reconnect with each other, right? And then with with nature and themselves even, right? With,
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Whipping out a sketchbook and drawing something using this versus like telling Midjourney, like, beautiful waterfall, blah, 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 or whatever. So, I don't know. I mean, again, it's hyper multifaceted. There's going to be all kinds of positives and negatives, and it'll be that, I think, so, but
Yeah.
in any case, it will be interesting. All right. Last question. Where do you see yourselves? All right. Where do you see yourselves personally? And then also with your work in 10 years, just as a kind of general comment, your vision for your future.
Yeah, so I think in 10 years, so we just got married. I think we'll probably have kids in 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think we will be continuing to collaborate together and work together on our joint design studio. In the past couple of years, we've kind of made a shift towards selling more of our products, because initially we were really just making like these beautiful art pieces, and the purpose of the art pieces were just to have them presented and maybe have them exhibited somewhere. But now we've kind of shifted into more of like product design. And I think ultimately we would like to have our work shown in some more shops and displayed in more little pop-up things. And we're just beginning to get into that, so it's been really exciting.
Yeah, there's nothing like seeing your work out there in people's everyday lives. Like even if it's just our jewelry pieces, or I don't know, something like that. I really like the idea of like it. Our work doesn't have to be like a one art piece that just well photographed and everything. It could be something that anyone can have. So that's kind of like where we're going over time. I think soon.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's like, like let your work touch as many people as possible, right? And that's, I think that's always a good goal to have. Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys see yourselves, because right now you're kind of entrenched in, fashion jewelry. Do you see yourselves maybe broadening your horizons or exploring other areas, or you're pretty much set on that path?
Oh, we want to get into houseware.
Yeah, I'm really interested in lighting too. I'm really interested in lighting. So we'll see. I mean, we have lots to experiment with.
I mean, why not? Why not, right? Why not? I mean, you could just print it, right? Yeah. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Come up with another design. But why? Yeah, absolutely. Why limit yourselves? It's interesting because when I restarted Artefacture, by the way, Artefacture was like a t-shirt brand. You guys probably don't even know this, but like
I think I have seen, like,
really
years ago. Yeah, I feel like I've definitely seen some.
Okay, I mean, we were kind of popular like 2005, 6, 7, 8. Like, I was doing this with my brother. We had like Design Will Save the World. I would pay for good design. So that our kind of niche was like cool graphic slogans for graphic designers, and that was kind of our thing. And like before we knew it, like we were in boutiques in SF and LA, and then in Spain, France, Germany, everywhere, and then we were selling in museum shops, SF MoMA, the MCA in Chicago, MoMA New York, and so anyway, so we did that for a while, and then whatever, life happened, I got burnt out, and I just kind of put a pause to it. I think when we moved here in 2010 to San Francisco, and then not recently, but like 2018-ish, I brought back Artefacture, and I'm like, 3D printing is this thing now, and I'm really in love with it. So let me figure out a way to, do something with that. And so it was jewelry. So I was kind of doing some jewelry stuff very briefly, but that was kind of my entree back into, number one, resurrecting the brand, and then figuring out what to do with 3D printing or how to get into it. And then since then, of course, I've kind of morphed into like tabletop, desktop kind of a thing. It's a thing right now. It's an experiment. But yes, housewares, furniture, lighting. I'm there with you guys. Like I definitely want to be, experimenting in those spaces. So I hear you. I think it's exciting. I think it's an awesome time to be a designer that knows how to use Rhino and could, fire up a 3D printer, right?
There's so much potential.
There is. All right, cool. So we are almost at the hour mark. Thank you guys so much for this conversation. I had a blast. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes.
I'm going to quickly, awesome. I'm going to quickly mention Alexis your website. It's AlexisWalsh.com, AlexisWalsh.com / shop, which is Jaw Studio, which is the Jaw Studio brand or the shop. You could check out the jewelry, etc. And again, thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate this. And we'll be talking soon, and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
You too.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been really fun.
Awesome. All right, guys, take care. We'll see you. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good one.